G'day everyone from the world down under. What a fantastic day for Sony we've actually had today. I'm going to give it a few minutes because I've popped on early with you guys, about 5 minutes early before we have this chat about the new camera today. But my God, Sony, you've done it again. I can't explain how excited I am about this camera. It doesn't mean I'm going to get it straight away, but boy, I'll tell you what, I probably will get this camera sometime this year. But stunning release by Sony. Now, I just want to wait for a few of you to log on because let me know what you think about that, because I'm also going to have a live chat with you as well about that too. But let me just turn on the air conditioner. It's a bit hot. It's around 30 degrees here today. But you know, I mean, I've just watched the announcement that came up. But a few things really surprised me about the release, that they really have knocked us out of the ballpark, I think. And once again, Sony have just proven that they really are the leaders and they don't hold things back. And that's probably one of the big differences between Canon and other companies like that I'll talk about once we start this in a minute. So if you are logging in a bit later, we've got about 4 minutes before we start. So say hi in the chat. I'd love to see everyone who's in here. We've got a7III. I'll just switch over so you can see who's here. We've got a7III. Richard's here. Courtney is here from Jamaica. Mickey Blue Eyes is here. Tony's here as well. This means you will skip the a7R III. Probably, Tony. Yeah, that probably is what I would do. I would probably buy that camera before the a7III, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on with everyone as well, about where I think this fits in, especially for me who's a wedding and portrait photographer. It fits in the whole part of my shooting. Ben said, don't lie, David, you'll get it ASAP. Mike's here, Robert's here as well, and Jean Lewis is here from Canada. Mike said, man, that thing is amazing. I prefer it over the a7R III. I'll buy it as soon as it's available. Stuart said hi from Breeze, California. Brad's here as well. David Johnson's here. Tom's here. Richard's here. I almost cried. Richard said he almost cried when he saw it. 24 megapixels, baby. And I love it. You know what, Richard, I'm shocked. I am absolutely shocked at what Sony have released here. Now, there's a couple of things which I'll talk about before we all get carried away, but I just can't believe that what they've released here. It is incredible, and I'm going to go through it with you all very shortly. Leighton said hi from Iowa. Mike, that's the final nail in the coffin for the 60. Canon, forget it. I mean, honestly, they released the M5 the other day, and once again, they've crippled it. There's no PADF in 4K video shooting. So again, they've crippled their cameras. Look at what Sony have just done. I mean, seriously, this camera for $2,000 US is incredible. And I really cannot understate how incredible this camera is. They've knocked it out of the ballpark. They really have. There's still room for the other cameras, and I'm going to discuss that with you in a minute. But boy, have they knocked this out of the ballpark. And Casper, you've said they've killed the A9. Well, I don't agree, and I'm going to talk about that shortly. I think there's still room for others. But it certainly will possibly hurt people that were going to buy the A9. If you're still a sports shooter and stuff like that, I'm going to talk about that difference. It's still relevant for me because there's one thing particular that I love in the A9 that I'll talk about when we have a look at this. David Johnson said the Man Black Panther was modelled after. What else are we saying? How are you doing, a7III? SPDDL says, Ripper, I agree, mate. I agree, and I'm going to watch your video once I finish this too. I just noticed you've posted one. Roy said, I'm so excited. Courtney said, the a7R III I can't do without. Not as good as the A9. I can do without. Okay, not as good as the A9. And I'm going to talk about where this all fits in shortly, guys, to all of you. What else have we got? Mike 3 Bowls said, new 24 megapixel backside illuminated sensor, 15 stops dynamic range. See, I know, it's ridiculous. 693 phase detect AF points, 93% coverage, same as the A9, 10 frames per second, and silent shooting. I know, it's just ridiculous. Rye said, guaranteed David is picking up the a7III. I will be. I will definitely be buying this sometime this year, just not at the release stage, but I will be buying it sometime this year. I'm still quite comfortable at the moment with what I've got, but I'm going to be buying it for sure. Mike's... what else? Mike said buffer 177 images, 4K with 6K pixel readout, S-Log 2 and 3. The battery is extra rated, and I'm going to go through all these things as well. Not only has Sony shot across the bow of the competition, but even their own products. This is a thing, Brad. I just can't believe Sony have done this. Now, it's 1:30, so I'm just going to go over to the screen, and then we're going to start, guys. So hang on a second. G'day everyone, just a quick, well, I don't know how quick it's going to be, but it's just a show talking about the new a7III. Sony have hit this out of the ballpark. I didn't expect this camera to have the features that they've just announced. There was a few things that I thought they would leave off, particularly things like the dual card slots. I'm going to go through the specs in a minute with you, but things like the dual card slots and the focusing is insane in what they've added onto this camera. And that's why I've actually said that it's basically a baby between the Sony a9 and the a7R III. It clearly, if you didn't have the money for those cameras, this would be the camera to buy. And in some cases, I think this is probably the best of the lot of them. It's really amazing what they've announced here for the price. I mean, I'm just trying to think what they're going to announce with the a7S III when that's announced. But this camera really has been, it's a hit out of the ballpark. And there's only a couple of things that I'll talk to you about where someone already mentioned in the chat that this, you know, basically was the end of the A9. And I don't think that's the case for a couple of particular reasons. And we'll talk about that. And there's also still room for the Sony a7R III as well. But if you're a photographer like me, if you're a wedding and portrait photographer, this camera probably is as good as you can get. It really is as good as you can get. I used to say the A9 was the best wedding photographer in the world, camera in the world. I think it's probably just been dethroned by this camera. I think this will definitely be the best event camera of its type now available anywhere for the price. I mean, you're talking about $2,000 US for this camera. Now, this is one of the differences between Sony and Canon and all the other manufacturers. They're not holding back with features. This is ridiculous what they've offered for this price. Sony are holding basically almost nothing back. And good on them, you know, like, I mean, I know some people are immediately going to start whinging saying, oh, I've just bought an a7R III or I've just bought an A9. Well, I hate to be like this, but that's tough luck. I've bought an A9. Am I angry about this? No, I'm not angry about this at all. I'm actually rapt that Sony have done this. This will definitely be something that I'll be looking at getting sometime this year. At the moment, I'm shooting with the A9 and the a7R II and my a6-500 and the a6-300. I think probably sometime during this year, I'll probably add this into the thing as well, because I also have a GH5. So I definitely probably will get one of these cameras sooner or later through the year. I did have two a7IIs, but I sold them recently, so they're gone, so I don't have to worry about selling them now because I wouldn't want to be left with an a7 II at the moment. There is some things like clearly the Play Memories apps aren't going to be on this camera, so if you do want that unlimited recording and things like that, that's a reason why I probably won't sell my a7R II, because I want to be able to have that ability to record uninterrupted for as long as I need to. But that's one of the issues that we're looking at. But let's switch over anyway, because I want to go through the actual camera with you, because boy, I just can't believe. Now, Canon, if anyone is from the Canon side watches this is what you should do. The M5 that you released yesterday, honestly, that when you can't even use PATF in 4K on that camera. So again, Canon have cut out features on that camera. They've put this ridiculous crop on there, things like that. Where Sony just haven't done that again. They're looking after their customers. So when people bag Sony, they really need to be looking at themselves. But let's go to the specs anyway, because I just wanted to sort of show you this. So it is a 24.2 megapixel camera, and I've said to you all along that for the way I shoot, to be totally honest, I think that 24 megapixel file size is I think it's that perfect spot between image resolution and croppability and file size and being able to store the file. So I still do believe that 24.2 megapixels is more than enough for what you can do in, say, wedding and events and 90% of portrait shoots. If you're still shooting, obviously, landscapes, things like that, well, then yes, the a7R III will come into it, because you may want that, you would want that detail. But I can tell you, for the way I work, for wedding and portraits, 24 megapixels is ample. I used to shoot with a Nikon D3S, and that was 12 megapixels, and I could do posters, print out posters from that size. So if you're dealing in file size, I'd still think 24 point whatever megapixels is the perfect file size in cameras. It doesn't take much to store them. They're easy to manipulate, unlike when you're starting to use A7R files or a7R2 or 3, which can be really hard to manipulate. So these are really easy to edit and things like that. So that's one fantastic thing about that file size. They don't take up much storage room, so I do think it's the sweet spot. The ISO range is 100 to 51,200. That's its native ISO. But basically, all through this camera, it's a new sensor that's been developed. It's an XMR CMOS sensor. It's back illuminated. It's still not the same as what the A9 is, because if you're looking at the A9 is if you look at here, where's the detail? The A9 actually has a fully high stacked design, so it's a stacked sensor. So it's still not the same sensor that the A9 is using, and I think that may have an issue when you're still dealing with rolling shutter. So I still think we've got to wait and see what happens with this camera if you're using electronic shutter. I still don't think it's going to be the A9, and that's one of the things that I was, when we were looking at the discussion a minute ago, someone said this will be the end of the A9, and I don't think it will be. But that's one of the main differences between the two designs. They're not using the same sensor, but having said that, they are using the same focusing mode, which is incredible. The initial rumors were that it was only going to be like 400 focusing points, and most of those were going to be contrast. This was on the Sony Alpha rumors, but basically this has got exactly the same focusing system as the A9, which I can tell you is the best focusing system I've ever used. So that's one amazing thing. I am going to come back to the chat too, guys, so I will come back to that as well. So let's go back to the a7 III again. It's saying the noise is meant to be really good. I just watched Jason Lanier's review, and he said the noise was the best that he'd actually seen in any camera. It does have the image stabilization as well. 14-bit RAW in the electronic shutter and the mechanical shutter. Again, so it looks like it's going to be incredible. It's got great video. You've got the log profiles that are built into it. I'm not going to go through all these because you can read these yourself. I'll put the link down below to this full specifications and features where you can read it through here. But I really think that Sony have knocked this out of the ballpark. Now, there's a couple of things that I was amazed about. I didn't think they'd put dual card slots in this camera, and that was one of the things where I was thinking if they didn't have dual card slots, I wouldn't be buying this camera, but they have. They've added dual card slots. The body basically is exactly the same as the A9 and the a7R III. And it has most of those other features from both of those cameras. It's even got pixel shift. It's got everything. So you really would have to justify going for an a7R III now, particularly or an A9, and not be buying this camera. You really would have to have a specific need to be buying the a7R III or the A9. If I was recommending anyone to buy a camera now, sort of coming into the industry, doing weddings, doing portraits, any of those type of things, this is the camera that I would be recommending them to buy. To be honest, I think Sony now have knocked everyone out of the game. Completely. I know we haven't used it yet, but clearly this camera is going to be similar to be using an A9, and it's going to be similar to using the a7R III. The focus is going to be better than the a7R III because this has the A9 focusing. I've used the a7R III and the A9 together. I actually went to a shop and used it extensively, and the A9 was definitely still better in focusing than the a7R III was. And so now you're going to be getting that inside this a7 III camera, which is just incredible. So they're things that really, I just can't believe they've done that in the camera price range that they've actually done it in. The battery is rated more now, so you're going to get over 700 shots. Clearly, so they've tweaked something inside the settings to enable the battery to work a little bit better. And whether those settings come down to the other cameras through firmware or something, I'm not sure. But still, it's just awesome. They've added log into this camera. They've held nothing back, really, nothing at all, apart from a couple of things which I'll discuss in a minute, where I think the A9 is still relevant. So You know, I want to go to the chat shortly because I'd love to know what you guys think about this, but I don't want to make this too long because I wanted to talk to you about where I think this still fits in. And I think why I actually called the YouTube video, it's like a baby A9 and the Sony a7R III. It's like the offspring that they've produced because it really is a mix of both of those cameras. It's stunning for the price. It really is stunning. So let's talk briefly about where I think the A9 is still relevant. Now, there's a couple of things, particularly for me, that are game changers for the way that I shoot, and I used this last night, for instance. I did a pre-wedding shoot, an engagement shoot last night. I was shooting outdoors late in the day, and I was using the Batis 85 1.8, and I wanted to shoot at 1.8 fully wide open, and it was backlit. And basically the image that I actually captured was using 32,000th of a second, 1/32,000th of a second. This is still not available on these other cameras that Sony have produced. It's still only available on the A9. So it's the a7II and the a7R III is still limited to 1/8000th of a second. And I have to be honest with you, that has changed the way that I've shoot. To be able to shoot with a wide angle lens wide open, for me particularly, it is a real game changer for the things that I've been able to do. And it has changed the way that I'm actually shooting. So that is one thing now where I'm not limited to that. Obviously too, if you're shooting sports, I shoot a lot of dance images where girls are actually running and jumping and things like that. Having the 20 frames per second is a big difference than having 10. So if you do need that niche type market, obviously the A9 is for you. But that's the only areas for me where I could say that this was different. The buffer clearly is going to be better in the A9. It's almost endless in the Sony A9. I think here you can shoot about 70 raw images, whereas basically on the A9 I think it's 170 or something like that. Anyway, it's way up. I've never ever run out of the buffer. So clearly the buffer is there as well. And I'm not convinced that the rolling shutter in the silent mode of this camera, I'm almost certain it probably won't be as good as the A9, but we still have to wait and see when it's released. They may have done something in this new sensor to enable it to be really good with the rolling shutter, so we'll have to wait and see. Now, so for me personally, I think still the A9 is relevant for what I shoot, but having this a7 III is the most perfect second camera for me. So that's the way probably that I will be shooting later this year. So sometime this year I'll be having an A9 and my second camera is going to be the a7 III. And I can tell you, you really don't need an A9 if you're not shooting the things I'm shooting. The a7 III is more than ample for everything now that you wanted to do. It's probably the best fusion camera that's out there. It'll probably have perfect video. It's the 6K downsample footage. It may be the same as what the A9 has, and I've found that A9 footage is the best that I've ever used. And it's got an advantage over the A9 because it's got the profiles that are actually inside the camera. So again, it's even better than the A9 for that fusion type camera. So like I said, they've hit it out of the ballpark. So where would you use the a7R III? Clearly, if you were doing landscape, the resolution is still very, very important. But for me, I'm using my a7R II less and less because once I've started using the A9, I just don't want to go to anything else. The focus on that camera for me is insane. The electronic shutter is insane. Well, now I've got all of those features that I could get inside the a7 III. So if you're still shooting landscape, if you're doing high-end studio work where retouching is incredibly important, the a7R III will still be very relevant. But I think, to be totally honest, I probably would get the a7 III definitely before I bought the a7R III for me, the way that I shoot. So that will probably definitely be the next camera that I get. But yeah, I just wanted to sort of talk about where those sort of things fit in. So let's go over to questions because I'm just curious to see what you guys have to think about, what you have to say about all of this, because I'd love to know what some of you are saying. Most of you at the beginning are just saying hi. Brad says, after using the A9, I'm really happy with the 24 megapixels, and that's, I agree, Brad. Like I've said, I think that's the perfect file size for working as an event and portrait photographer. 24 megapixels is ample. I can crop into that quite a fair way before it starts to pixelate. And I'm really happy with running that megapixel. So yeah, I agree with you. Most people were saying they were really excited. Courtney said the a7R III I can do without, not as good as the A9. In some ways, though, it is as good as the A9, but in some things, which I mentioned a minute ago, it's not. That 1/32,000th of a second shutter speed for me is a game changer for me, but that's just the way I like shooting, and the 20 frames per second for dance things and stuff like that. But 90% of the shoots that most people will do, the a7III is going to be more than ample for that. What else have we got? It's also got USB 3C. So again, yeah, that's better than what the A9 has, because the A9 never had that. It's got pixel shift, which the a7R III has. It's basically got everything the a7R III has except for the resolution, but it betters it in things like focus and things like that. What else have we got? Big Blue said, just watched Danny and Jason talking about the a7R III and they gave me serious gas. Sony said repeatedly the A9 was specifically for sports wildlife. It was the reviewers who said it was good for weddings. Matt Fan, I still think it is. I still think the A9 is, well, it was the best wedding camera out there. I think the a7 III now has topped it, especially for the money that they're asking. Like I said, those two cameras for me personally will work amazingly well together. The release is going to be April, I believe, so we're going to have a month or so to wait. Courtney Chan said the autofocus on the A9 can't be beaten. The a7R III with the A7 MC11 do not work as good on the A9 yet, and it won't work as well as the A9. There's no way, but I think the a7 III probably will. Looking at they're basically saying it's got the same autofocusing system. It may not be quite as fast, but I'll tell you what, it's probably going to be very close. Hello again. And just before I talked, I can't remember whether I mentioned at the beginning of this, this is the difference between Sony and other companies like Canon that really hold features back. Sony aren't holding anything back here, guys. They really have held nothing back here, and I really have to admire them for that. And I've bought an A9. Am I angry at Sony for releasing this? No. I think it's fantastic. What else? We've got... You have to admit it, even with the shortcomings, a company definitely has to distinguish and adjust for price points. This is the best the company has done. It's incredible. I can't believe they've released this camera for the price point that they're releasing it at. I really can't believe that they've done that. They innovate and incorporate features. That's right, they have. Look at Canon, they're holding things back once again. How can Sony be so prolific in developing and releasing these products while their competitors seem to be struggling? Might become a great historical business case. Could be true. I don't know. The difference seems to be that Sony don't tend to hold things back. They are releasing... When you buy into the Sony system, and this is what sometimes I don't understand, guys, that when you buy into the Sony system, you can't expect to not have an upgrade down the track 1 to 2 years later. It's just the way that Sony work. Now, does that bother me? No. I'm not forced to go out and buy the a7 III, and I won't buy it immediately that it's released. I will buy it sometime during the year, but I won't buy it immediately. I don't hate Sony for releasing other cameras. I've bought the Sony A9. I've bought the Sony a7R II. Was I angry when Sony released the a7R III? No. I actually love Sony innovating because eventually I can get that camera and these other features are put down onto their lower end cameras, so everyone wins. I would much prefer Sony's system of releasing multiple cameras and giving us the ability to purchase if we want to purchase it. You don't have to purchase it, but it's there if you want to purchase it, rather than being like Canon that's holding features back from everyone, forcing you to get a higher end camera. I don't want to do that. Sony have still got the A9, and I've mentioned features in the A9 that are better than what the a7 II will be. That 1/32,000th of a second shutter speed, you're only going to get that in the A9. Probably the rolling shutter in silent shutter is going to be much better in the A9, the 20 frames per second. So there's still a reason to get the A9 if you need it, but you don't have to get it, and that's one of the beauties about this. So it does my head in a little bit when people start to whinge about Sony releasing so many cameras. I actually think it's a good thing. Richard Ivor said, a camera takes at least a year to develop. The XH1 was just announced. This camera was coming out no matter what Fuji did, and that's right, it was. It's really destroyed that camera now, though. I mean, why would you bother, seriously? Mav fan said, yeah, that's true. Ryan said, does this release push the rumored A9R off to next year? Well, no one knows. I don't think you're going to see the A9R for a while. The A7S probably will be the next one, or the a7S III will be the next camera that's released, probably at NAB. They could also release an A6-700 or whatever that will be shortly as well, because they still have to, I think, look for that market too. But it's hard to say which way Sony are going to go, because this a7III is so well priced that is there going to be a need for the a6-700? Let me know in the chat whether you think you still need that, because this still is, for the price, the a7III is going to be a great video camera. Like I said, it's going to be a great fusion camera, guys. It really is going to be a great camera. It has pixels shift. Yeah, it has. That's true. Is the battery life improved because it's not a stacked sensor? Well, it may be. But the a7R III is not a stacked sensor, so I don't know why. They must have done some... I don't think the a7R III is a stacked sensor. What else have we got? Beast of a camera for the price, Ronnie said. It is. I totally agree. I think Sony have hit this out of the ballpark. Jonathan said, what does an A9R bring to landscape that the a7R III doesn't bring? Well, it'll only be file size, I would think. They're talking about, you know, say 70 plus megapixels in file size. The A9 is probably going to be something that most of us won't need at this stage, but I suppose if you were shooting landscape, it would be advantageous, or if you were shooting... Remember, the more detail you have when you're doing like studio high-end retouching, the better the image can be for high-end retouching, but it's only studio work. That's why I use my a7RIII when I'm doing studio work, but if I'm doing portraits, I'll be using the A9 or the a7III when I eventually get it. That's what I use when I'm doing portraits now, because I've found 24 megapixels is ample for that type of work. Carl Ryan says the a7III has everything in the kitchen sink. It has. Like I said, Sony have held nothing back. I was absolutely gobsmacked. When I was listening to the announcement, I thought there's no way they will put dual card slots in this camera. There's no way they'll have the same focusing system as the A9, and they have. I just can't believe it. For the price, I cannot believe it. What else? JP said, I agree, but the a7R III has 43 megapixels. The A9 just has a higher burst performance, so I'm confused why high frame rate, high megapixel camera would be needed for landscapes. Well, it's not for landscapes. I mean, if you were talking about landscapes, you don't need one. But remember, most of these cameras now are used for multiple purposes. So even though you're dealing with a a7R III, you don't buy an a7R III just for landscapes. Like I said, you would buy that for using in studio with flash. But again, remember, they've added that ability now with this a7III that you can use the 10 frames per second with high-end flashes. So it clearly, like I said, they haven't held back at all with this camera. I can't believe they've offered this camera for this price. Richard said, I sold my a7R II waiting on this camera. I just sold 2 a7IIs recently, so I'm glad I did sell them, because the price now will be dropping right through the floor. But yeah, it's just the game, isn't it? I mean, like I said, it doesn't upset me. I basically write the stuff off. Tony Pierce said Sony did this shut down Nikon and Canon's attempt to break into the mirrorless full frame. It's game over, guys. I don't know how they're going to answer this camera. I really do not know how they're going to answer this. And you know what? It scares me to think what the a7S III is going to have. I just can't wait to see what they release with that camera. They're holding back at this stage. Wait till that comes out. Imagine the A9 sort of video performance and you're getting 4K 60p or even higher. We're just going to have to wait now. I'm so happy with what they've released, because I thought they really would hold back on that camera and they haven't. So I'm super happy, and I'm super happy for you guys, because to be able to get into this type of camera for $2,000 is unbelievable. And seriously, I cannot believe why anyone would buy a Canon or Nikon than buy this camera. I mean, seriously, when people start to realize what Sony have just done, it's game over. It really is game over. We've had the Sigma announcement today, and I'm going to talk about that in another another talk shortly. But the thing is too, everyone's whinging about the Sigma being big lenses, but again, now that's more lenses that the E-mount has got. The more that they're starting to come into E-mount, the better off we are. And I can tell you, I've used Sigma lenses before. When I was shot Nikon, I used to use the 85 1.4 lens, the art lens, and it was stunning. And now that we're getting those lenses, yes, they are bigger, but if you do want to go down that line, you don't want to get the Zeiss type lenses, and you want to pay a little bit less, the Sigma art lenses are stunning. They're going to be heavier, yes, so if you don't want to do that, you wouldn't buy one. But we've still got more options, and this is the thing. People have to stop whinging about stuff. To have more options is fantastic, and I certainly would prefer to have Sigma than use something like Samyang, something like that, because the quality is better. David is really around. Oh, well, Carl, I can't believe they've done it for this price. I really cannot believe it. I'm flabbergasted, honestly. What else we got? This is going to be a great camera. Casper said, I agree. How do you compete with the $2,000 for full entry? You can't, JP. You cannot. There's nothing in the industry that can compete with this camera for that price. Nothing. Nowhere can get anywhere near it. I'm amazed. Like I said, I've shot the A9 now for nearly 12 months, and that is the best focusing camera I've ever used in my life. I hate to go to anything else. And obviously, this is probably going to be very, very similar. So to have that type of focus on a $2,000 camera, it's a game changer. It really is a game changer. JP said, maybe I feel like the A9 was meant to be a high burst, so the A9R might be possible, but seems excessive for Sony to have a 40+ megapixel high burst camera. Yeah, I'm not sure where that will be, and I don't think it will be high burst. I don't think there's any reason to have a high burst 70+ megapixel camera, but we'll have to wait and see. You never know what they'll release in that. Forked Film said, waited almost a year and exceeded my expectations. Me too, mate. Totally exceeded them. Damn, Sony hit it out of the park. Now I've got to sell. Recently purchased X100F. Thought I'd go all Fuji. And like I said, I was pretty enthusiastic about the Fuji, the XH1, and that is still a really good camera. Don't get me wrong, Fuji, that is a great camera, but this has blown everything out of the water. Everything out of the water. And JP said, Dreamer said, I shoot 24 on the D610. I'm planning to move to Sony. Was thinking the a7R III. Now confused. Well, I'd be getting the a7 III, Dreamer. Definitely. JP said, but Sony clearly doesn't care about cannibalizing their current bodies, so an A9R could happen, possibly. Mavfan said, JP, but the A9R would not be high, so they're still talking about the A9 there. Brad said, the stack sensor of the A9 owns silent shooting and fast readout. And that's the thing I think is going to be the difference, Brad. I think you'll probably still find that the rolling shutter won't be as good. But I tell you what, for the money difference, that's incredible. So unless you need that niche market, it's an advantage for me. But to be completely honest, if I wasn't running a professional business like I am, shooting wedding and portraits full time, I would be buying that camera over the A9. I'm only lucky that I can afford the A9 because I'm running this business I'm running. But if I wasn't running this sort of more of a high-end wedding business that I'm running, I'd be definitely just getting the A9. And when I say that too, it's more that I'm also shooting dance photos as well, which is where I need that high frame rates. If you don't need that, I could get by with the a7 III. There's no reason why I couldn't get by with that. If I didn't have the A9 now, would I buy the A9? No, I wouldn't buy it. I would be buying the a7 III. That's being totally honest with you. But would I sell my A9? No way, because I'm so used to using that 1/32,000th of a second now, and the 20 frames per second for me is such a great thing to have. The main reason why I love the A9 is because of the that 1/32,000th of a shutter is just incredible, and not having rolling shutter when I'm shooting in silent. So I still would be keeping my A9, but like I said, I'm being honest with you, if I didn't have the A9, I probably would buy two a7 IIIs. But that's just basically where I would be if I was buying this camera now. Would I buy an a7R III? No, I'd also be buying an a7 III as well. I would definitely be buying an a7 III over the a7R III. That's because I don't shoot much landscape, but that's me personally. I'm going to get people commenting down below that you need it for cropping in and things like that. Yes, that is an advantage sometimes, but I basically shoot to get the image correct in the camera. Very rarely do I crop much. So for me personally, it's not an issue having a camera where I don't crop much. So that's the way that I shoot. And remember, most of the time I'm shooting events and portraits. So for me personally, I'm very comfortable shooting in that 24 megapixel. And I do not want to be shooting a wedding in 40 megapixel file sizes. It's too much to store, way too much to store. So I'm happy sort of shooting there. Let's continue down with the questions still. Dreamer said you don't need an a7R III unless you are doing large prints. Well, you can shoot massive prints with 24 megapixel, guys. Trust me, massive prints. Remember, they're doing billboards with these. So you're shooting. If you look at Apple, Apple have got billboards shooting with these. Don't believe you can't shoot big poster sizes with 24 megapixel file size. Like I said, I used to do it with 12 megapixels. It'll be interesting to see how the weather sealing is on this camera, see if it's any better than the others. So I'm still waiting, obviously, to see what that is. Needed to be a super durable camera. Not much difference between the a7R III and the A9. This changes the urge towards the a7R III. Yeah, I wouldn't be buying the a7R III unless you're definitely shooting more landscapes. Because remember, the focus on this camera is going to be better than the a7R III. So unless you need that resolution, I would be buying the a7 III. Save the money, get a better lens. JP said Sony knew what they were doing with the stage releases. Yes, they certainly did. Lewis said, I had the A9 for a little testing and didn't like it much. The a7R III was much better bang for the buck. The a7 III is going to be great, but Sony needs a durable camera. I've found them to be way as durable as anything that I've owned before. The only weak spot for me has been that the mount at the top for the flash. That's the only thing I've found where they haven't been built well. I'm totally happy with the way that they're built. A film by Michael, is this going to be better than the a7S Mark II? Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't be buying that. Yeah, for video, I'm sure it will be. Focusing alone is going to be way better than that. You're talking about a 6K downsampled image. I can tell you, the A9, check out the video that I just put on the other day of Thailand. Have a look at those images that I shot with my A9. It was stunning. It was stunning in low light. The focus was incredible. And check out how sharp that is when I'm walking on the beach talking to the camera. It's stunning. This is going to be as good, if not even better. What else have we got? I will keep my a7R III until they have the a7R IV. It could be an A9 killer. I don't think it will. Well, it will be for the average consumer, but it's certainly not going to be for the sports shooter. I still think there's a market for the A9. I really do still think there's a market there for that. But clearly, it probably is going to hurt sales. People that would be thinking about going for an A9 that don't really need it possibly would think, well, I now don't need to buy the A9. I can get by with the a7 III. And to be honest, like I said before, if I didn't have an A9, I probably wouldn't be buying the A9 now. I would be just buying an a7 II or two of them. Yeah, so it's definitely going to probably hurt their sales, but they've always marketed the A9 as a sports camera and as their high-end camera. I don't think Sony are even going to be worried about that. Companies love to have a high-end model. They don't need to sell much of that high-end model. The thing is that it's still there. It's still at the top of their table. They can still say this is our ultimate camera and this is basically what that camera will offer, what the others haven't got. Like I said, they've still got, there's a different processor in that camera. You can only shoot 32 thousandths of a second on that camera. The rolling shutter no doubt will be better on that camera. So there's things like that you know, that basically are still important. The buffer is going to be better on that camera, so there's still room for that camera. The a7 III is going to be $2,000, yes, roughly US. What else have we got? Sony's going to make dollars on the glass, not bodies, and that's true. They do make a lot more money on the glass. They'll sell a bucket load of these cameras, though. They're going to sell so many of these cameras. JP said, glad I got the a7R III for 2750. The A9. Casper said the A9 is toast. I love it. I'm happy with mine, Casper. I'm not upset at all. I'm happy. It just means I can get one of these as well. JP Dreamer, shoot with native glass if you can. What else? A7R2 resale just tanked. Yeah, I wouldn't be selling it, I don't think. You should keep it though. Like I said, I'm going to keep my A7R2 just for the Play Memories apps alone. There's apps inside that which I love. I love having the variable ND filter apps that are built in, the time-lapse apps that are built in, the Play Memories hack that gives me unlimited recording. So I'm going to keep it just for that alone. They're probably not worth selling now, to be honest. Dreamer said, my initial plan was to get the a7R III and just get the 2470, selling my Nikon gear, and that's what I did. I sold all of my Nikon gear. What else have we got? Do you think that Canon has tech found? Think Canon has the tech found in the a7 III, but for whatever reason are waiting? Well, possibly. The problem is, well, they just don't want to release stuff. They don't want to take away from their higher-end cameras, and that's the difference in thinking between Canon and what Sony are thinking. Sony aren't thinking like that, and that's a much better way of gaining sales and building their market. Clearly, they're not holding anything back. Canon just released the M5, and how long has that camera been in development? And look at the crop factor. It's 1.6, but it's an APS-C camera, so that ends up being a crop of over 2 if you take that into account. And you can't even use PDAF in 4K. It goes to contrast detect. So clearly they're holding things back again. Sony haven't done that here at all. They've really held nothing back in this camera. They've held nothing back. And that's the difference between the two of these companies. Again, Canon have shot themselves in the foot. I am DeBrown said, I bet the next APS-C camera they may finally give will be a flip-out screen. And you're probably right. That may be the thing that's different with their cameras. They may release a flip-out screen. And I hope they do, because I'd want to buy that in a heartbeat. If they bring us a6-700 with a flip-out screen. It looks to me like Sony aren't going to release that in their full-frame bodies the way that they're going. They may in the future, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon. JP said they don't want to eat sales from the 5D or the 1D, and that's the problem. But that's a silly thinking. That's a way to go broke in the end if you keep thinking like that. Remember, it's all about sales and building your platform, and they're just holding back, and people will start changing over. If I was shooting Canon, I definitely now would be thinking, I've had it, that's it, I'm moving over. That's the end for me. I moved from Nikon because I was bored with the Nikon system. I wanted to get into a company that innovated, and I wanted to use the EVF particularly, things like that, and that's why I sold all of my Canon gear. It was probably nearly $40,000 of Nikon gear that I sold, and changed completely over to Sony. So it was a big move for me, but they just weren't innovating enough, and Canon are even being worse. So, you know, I just can't understand why they're not shifting over, honestly. I mean, like I said, the M5 the other day would have been the last straw for me. That would have been it. I would have said, that's it, I'm out of there. They're not, Canon fanboys aren't going to like me saying that, but it's the truth. They're just not innovating. This camera is the game changer for its price. For $2,000, you are getting basically a mini A9. It's incredible. And when I say mini A9, it's almost got everything the A9 has in it. It's incredible. For $2,000, you're getting a full-frame camera that's better than anything that's out there for its price range. So Fuji now must be absolutely crapping in their pants, I think. What else have we got? Carl said, crazy news, Hard. This is the one for me, but I said that about the R3. Lewis said, David O said, Fuji has better bang for the buck glass and the user interface isn't garbage. The a7 III will sell like hotcakes, but Sony A2 might be sooner than expected. I don't think they'll bring the Sony A9 II out that quickly. I'll be surprised. JP said the A9 might be dead. I don't think so. I think they want a camera that's up that top part of their ecosystem. Thanks for your thoughts. No worries, mate. Thanks for that. Anyone... Though the A9 would be the larger body, and it was the R3 that used the same body size. Did Sony announce a price for the Canadian market? No, you just have to sort of work out roughly the exchange rate. And I'm thinking probably, like I said, that it's going to be $3,000 in Australia. So it'd probably be a similar price in Canada, I would think. It might be $2,800 or something like that. Oh, so JP said $2,599. Still a great price. What else we got? Lewis said, first generation is always refreshed quickly by Sony. JP, I hope they don't do the same with the GM lenses, all those first generation lenses. What else have we got? I'm so glad I dumped my Canon gear last month and moved to Sony. JP said that. So he's moved from Canon. I think you're going to get a stack load of people jumping ship now, guys. I really do think that this is probably the camera that is going to make people jump ship. If they were thinking about it before, remember I jumped ship to the Sony a7 II. That was a big difference for me to go from I had a D4S. That was a big difference for me to go from a D4S to the a7IIs because the focus wasn't as good, but it had other features that I loved. And now, like, I just can't explain what a game changer this camera probably is going to be for most people. Robert said, if you wait, the next best Sony camera you will never buy, and that's right, they will always release better gear. You just can't wait. You've just got to work out what's right, basically, at the time for you. Robert said, agreed, but this a7R III was a worthwhile wait for those that were locked down, and it is. If you're budget conscious, this camera is incredible. Like I said, there's probably no better wedding and portrait photographer camera than this for the money. No better camera anywhere. It's by far the best camera I've ever seen around that price range. Tony said, sold my a6500 in anticipation of the new camera. Had no idea it would be so loaded. Interested in comparing it with my a7R III as far as the fun factor goes. Like I said, for me, guys, I wouldn't buy the a7R III now. And I'll probably, personally, like I said, I wouldn't buy the A9 either. I'd get the a7 III. But that's just personal. I won't sell my A9, though, because I love it to death. But that's basically what I'd be saying. Team Tan said US $1,999 is about $2,600. Sony announced an hour ago that it will be sold in Australia for $3,000. Yeah, and I expected it to be around about that price range here in Australia. I still think for the price, that is still an amazing camera. Obviously, it's more expensive than the US, but for $3,000, it's still an amazingly good camera. It's just we pay for the dollar exchange rate at the moment. You really can't go on the specs. I curse at my Sony, but I love my Fujis. Yeah, I can understand what you're saying, Lois, but I mean, I'm incredibly happy. And I've said to the people that follow me that, and I've been using the A9 extensively over the last 12 months. That camera for me is the best camera I've ever used. Well, I've got a feeling the a7 III is going to be just as good. And if it's just as good as what the A9 is, there's going to be nothing out there to beat it. Nothing at all. Roy said it doesn't look like it has a panorama feature. No, it won't. And they're things now that have basically gone out of these cameras. I don't know why they don't add those in, but they just don't seem to keep them. Are you going to keep your Panasonic gear? Casper said, yes, I'm not going to sell my GH5. Until Sony gives me the ability to shoot 4K 60p, I won't be getting rid of the GH5. That's still, I believe, the best type of camera for that type of thing at this stage. I may change when the a7S III or whatever the release comes out, but even then it's going to be later on in the year. Remember, I still, even though I'm running a full-time business, I still have to justify business expenses and things like that, and I have to run my gear for a certain period of time before I can upgrade it. So at this stage, I probably will keep my GH5 for this year, or most of this year. I may not even sell it. I might just still keep it and run that as a second camera. The beauty with the GH5 is that I can run that for any period of time without any overheating issues. So I can run it at 4K 60p without it overheating, and I can leave it running in 35 degrees Celsius, 105 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever, for all day, and it's not going to overheat. So that is a really good thing for me to have in my arsenal. So I probably will keep it for that alone. But so yeah, I will keep it. I'm not going to sell it. What else have we got? Fuji has beautiful colours out of the camera. True, they do. They're great colours. I'm not knocking Fuji at all. I just still think, though, this camera has knocked it out of the ballpark, JP. I really do. What else have we got? Robert said, I agree. I'm sick. I did not wait longer when I bought my a7R II. Still a great camera. Robert, don't be sick. Don't be sick about your a7R II. I still love my a7R II camera. That takes amazing pictures. There's nothing with the a7R II. I'm still using mine now. So there's nothing wrong with that camera. So don't feel sick about it. Just think though, in 12 months time or whenever you're ready to upgrade, the a7III will be even cheaper. You'll be able to pick that up at an even cheaper rate. So don't feel bad about having an a7R II. And that's what I want to say to people. You should not get jealous or whatever about what other cameras are out there, because the more that Sony release, this gives you the more of the ability to be able to get this camera further down the line. You don't have to get this straight away. The a7R II is an amazing camera, so don't feel bad about having that camera at all. What else have we got? Stuart said, I have shot landscape with the A9R with great results. I just took my A9 to Thailand. I wanted to try that camera for the first time as basically like a street shooting camera and doing video at the same time, and it was outstanding. This is why I'm so enthusiastic about the a7III, because basically it's like a mini A9, and the A9 is stunning. If the a7III is anything like that, I just can't wait to see what it's like. Roy said, it looks as though I'm going to stay with the a7II as it has the Panorama feature. I just use stitching now whenever I need to do that, Roy, but I can understand what you're saying. You can't walk up to those billboards. There has to be some distance, and there does, Lewis. But remember, I shot, I can easily do massive posters with I used to do them with a 12 megapixel file size. I used to do 20 by 30 posters. For brides, and no one ever complained about what they look like. So you can blow up a 24 megapixel more than what you actually think you can. So don't be limited and believe you can't blow up a 24 megapixel file size up to massive size posters. You can easily do more than what I would ever need for running a wedding and portrait photography business. You know, the images, you can't see them, but the images behind me are done with those file sizes. This, which I'll show you, these were done with 24 megapixel camera sizes. So this was done with the a7 II. So, you know, if you're looking at these massive posters, if you're looking at these massive posters, you don't need these massive megapixels to get image sizes that the normal client would need. Yes, if you're going to fill a billboard, a massive building, and you want to be able to walk up and see detail, yes, that will matter. But for the average photographer, it's not going to matter. I'm telling you that for 99.9% of my clients, never go outside of what 24 megapixels will give me. But yeah, I'm just telling you the way that I shoot. It may not be for everyone. What else have we got here? a7III also has no flash sync port. Yes, true, but I've never used it. I never used that port at all. Roy said, I just love my A9 as my #1 camera. I'm the same as you, Roy. But gee, the a7III would be an amazing second camera to have to that. It really would be. The a7III will be a great complement to either the A9 or the R3, and that's right, what an amazing second camera. And even a first camera. Like I'm saying, if you had this just as your first camera, I bet you any money, wedding photographers are going to snap this camera up like crazy. This will be the definite camera that wedding photographers will snap up, for sure. What else have we got? Gerald Williams said it's the Boxer a7III to the Cayman A9. Yes, Mad Free Street said yes, but it will hurt both the A9 and the a7R III. I don't think Sony are worried about that. It'll take sales away, but they're still going to be getting sales. And this is the thing that Sony, this is the difference between someone like Sony and someone like Canon. Sony don't care that it's going to take sales away from the A9. They know that that A9 is still going to have a market for sports photographers. They know that that's still there if people want it. But they're still going to make massive sales with the a7III. Then they're going to start selling lenses. So basically they're bringing people into the system. And this is a better way of thinking. Canon are thinking the wrong way. Canon are saying, well, we're going to hold features back so that if we hold those features back, you might be forced to go and buy the dearer models that are out there for things like video and stuff like that. Sony aren't thinking like that. So I think this is a much better marketing strategy than what the other companies are doing. Losing sales from the a7R III and the A9 is not going to bother Sony at all, I don't believe, because they're going to sell bucket loads of these a7 IIIs. I can tell you, they're going to sell bucket loads of these cameras. Tony Pierce said, professional sports shooters A9, high-end landscapes a7R III, everything else a7 III. And I agree with you, Tony. I think that's the perfect comment there, exactly. So Tony has said professional sports A9, high-end landscapes a7R III, everything else a7 III. And I agree with you completely. I think this camera will hurt a6-700 sales as well. But trust me, I wouldn't buy an a6-500 now. I'd be buying the a7 III, definitely, if I was in the market for that. Brad said, agree, this is the camera the masses wanted, so it will get more sales than any other body, and it will. I said this is probably going to be the camera that is going to convert a lot of people over to Sony, definitely. It really will. JP said a7 III is out in April, so just in time for the wedding season. I think they've done this deliberately now because WWPI is on now. What a perfect time to drop this camera, and I think that's why Sony have announced that now. This, like I said, this will be the major wedding camera out there, and I can't wait to see it being used. Mikkel said, hi David, hi mate, how are you? JP said, on the camera boards, even the Nikon and camera fanboys agree that this camera feature-rich at the price point. There's nothing like it, JP. There is nothing, I can tell you now, there is nothing to beat this camera anywhere near that price point. Anywhere near that price point. That's why I'm so enthusiastic about this camera. I'd love to buy 2 of these cameras, and I probably will eventually. But stunning. For that price range, it is stunning. I'm so happy and so thankful that Sony have done this. Mikkel said, Canon sure shot themselves in the other foot. I know, they just announced the M5. Again, now they're just going to be laughed out of the water. The things that they've held back with that camera, and look what Sony just released. Angel said, I just purchased a second body a7 II for US $850. And again, that's what I used to use, and you saw the image that I shot with that. It's still a great camera. Mike said, bam, my a7 III just went for $980. Perfect, Mike. Congratulations on selling your gear. Now Canon just announced their Canon M50. I know, they must be just rolling and turning over in their grave, basically thinking, oh my God, what have Sony just done? The A9 is going to be going to get 60 frames per second update now. I don't think so. I don't think they're going to update that camera. Look, remember, there's no need for Sony to update that camera, Casper. And this is the thing. I'm happy with the way that camera performs. And this is what I'm saying to people, that there's nothing wrong with the Sony A9. It's still probably going to be the best camera that Sony produces for what it does. Like I said, there's nothing out there that does 20 frames per second. There's nothing out there, I believe, that will have less rolling shutter in the silent shutter like what that has. And the 1/32,000th of a second shutter speed alone would be a reason for me to buy that camera. If you don't need that camera, you wouldn't buy it. You'd buy the a7 III. For its niche market, that's the best camera that there is out there. And remember, it's like I said, there's no problem with the camera manufacturer having an elite camera at the top. That's one thing that they never had. With Nikon, you always had the D4 series or the D5, whatever, was their top-end camera. Everyone didn't go out and buy that camera. That was for a certain market. Most other people went down to the cameras below it. Well, now Sony have a camera too that's sitting right up the top there. That's why I don't think they're going to be worried about the sales of this camera. If they were that worried about the sales, they probably wouldn't have released the camera that they've released. They're not. They know that the sales are probably going to be taken away, but they still wanted a camera to sit up the top. They still wanted an a7R III to sit up the top for landscape photographers, for high-end studio shooters. The a7 III is going to be for everyone else. And shortly, there'll be an a7S III that will be for the video side to sit up the top with the A9. You'll have an a7RIIS or a7S III for video too to sit there as well at the top for that. So, yeah. What else have we got? The M50 is just garbage. Well, it is if you compare it to this camera for sure, but yeah. What's your take on the Fuji X-H1? I'm really stunned by the new ETE. I'm not sure what that means, Mikkel. From what I've read, the Fuji X-H1 is a really good camera for what it is. Again, though, it's limited in video. That's half of the problem. I think you're limited to 15 minutes if you're shooting 4K 30p. So there's things like that are the issue. And the other issue too, I suppose, is it's never going to be good as full frame if you're dealing with noise, because you can't beat full frame for the bokeh and the noise. So, and there is a look about the full frame for video. So I think the a7III has blown it out of the water, to be honest, but that's just my opinion. I would be getting the a7III over the Fuji X-H1. Shane said it's better for video, it has picture profiles, and yes, it does. Having said that, though, like I said, I just use the A9 in Thailand, and I just use the standard profile, and it's stunning. I've moved away from using picture profiles, and I think sometimes, look, originally I said the same thing. I was begging Sony to bring out picture profiles. But after, and this is the reason why I took my Sony A9 to Thailand to test. I wanted to test the A9 to see how well it actually performed without those picture profiles. And I was stunned how well the video was in that camera. So to be honest, unless you've got incredibly high dynamic range requirements, like a bride that's in shade and sun, sort of mixed between the two, a groom in the shade and the bride out in sun, I wouldn't be using picture profiles because they're incredibly hard to grade, and that was the issue for me. Shooting Fuji, which is a mixture of stills and video, I was spending so much time in grading that I've now moved away from using picture profiles, and I'm trying to shoot more in the standard profiles, and I'm really happy with how that's starting to go, and that's the reason why I wanted to use the Sony A9. But having said that, the a7III has those picture profiles, so yes, it's going to be a step up from the A9, I think. It's going to be a great video camera, I think. What else have we got? Angel says he's getting the a7III. I don't blame you, mate. For that price and what the Sony are offering, it's incredible. Zeman said Sony has no 10-bit 422 colour, 4K 60p recordings. These are going to be things that they're going to release, I'd say, Zhangji, with the new Sony a7S. That's the reason why I've got the GH5, is because I need that 4K 60p. 10-bit to me does not matter much, I'm being honest with you here. I'm happy shooting 8-bit for what I'm shooting, and my clients would never be able to tell the difference. But you're going to see these things with the new A7S, but you're going to pay for it. That's going to be a lot more expensive than the GH5, that's for sure. And Angel said even the GH5S in low light cannot beat Sony. No, and it can't. You can't beat the Sony for low light. And that's the thing I can tell you. Whenever I was dealing with low light, I'd stop using the GH5 and I'd be using the a6-300. The GH5 is even not as good as the a6-500 in low light. Sony's definitely going to kill the GH5 in low light, that's for sure. Keep in mind, Sony is targeted for hybrid users. Let's wait for the a7S III. What else have we got? I've got to try out the new Fuji X-H1, and if it sucks, I'm going Sony. I would be getting the a7 III for sure. I'm happy I waited jumping from Canon. I wanted the a6-500 for AF and speed, but now I'll get the a7 III. Yep, I would too. I wouldn't buy the a6-500 now at the moment. I'd be buying the a7 III. Definitely, if you're thinking about that, I definitely would be buying the a7 III, as that. I just don't think you can beat that camera at all. The a6-700 may change that, but we're going to have to wait and see what they released. Stacey said, hey David, I have the a7 II and have been waiting for this camera. I guess there will be a ton of used a7 II cameras on the market now. Probably not worth selling my used one. And that's the thing, you've got to, I suppose you have to think about whether you sell it, Stacey. A few have said they got $850 or something, so if you got in quick, you might be able to get a decent amount for it. Or just keep it as a second camera. You can still run the Play Memories hacks on that, so if you needed it for that, you've still got that ability to run it. So yeah, I was lucky I sold 2 of them recently, so I have got rid of mine. And JP said keep it as a backup, and that's one good thing that you can actually do. The a7III does have amazing capabilities. It's just not targeted for professionals who know how to handle and utilize 10-bit. Different targeted audience. Well, I suppose you're only talking about high-end video, and it's not targeted at that range. But I'm going to tell you, Ryan, that I think it'll probably be outstanding. Check out my A9 video; it was gorgeous. I love the a6-500. It still has a panorama feature, and that's true. It does. That's one reason that I like that camera as well. Casper said the A9 is the best camera I've ever owned. I'm the same too. It is definitely the best I've ever owned. It's going to be interesting to see how close the a7 III comes to it. Dreamer says, I'm in the market for a great stills camera. Get the a7 III, mate. I don't think you're going to get any better than that anywhere. What else have we got? Should I wait for the a6-700 now? No. No, I don't think so. I don't think you're going to get any better than that camera. Remember, the a6-700 is still going to be a crop sensor. It's still not going to have the full frame look. So if you want full frame, you're not going to get better than what that camera gives you. So I think if you were thinking about it, I'd just jump in. I would jump in now. So it's saying, what's the difference between the a7 III and the a9R other than the resolution? There isn't really any difference, I don't think. Looking at that question there, he's asked what the difference is between the a7 III and the R3 other than resolution. Well, it's actually, if you're looking at both of those cameras in technology, the a7 III is better. The a7 III is better in technology than what the a7R3 is. The only reason why you would buy the a7R3 is for resolution. If you don't need the resolution, you'd get the a7 III. And it's the same with the A9. If you don't need the 20 frames per second and that 1/32,000th of a frame and the buffer, you get the a7 III. The a7 III is incredible for that money. I can't believe they've done it. I really can't believe that they've done it. Casper said sale on all A9 cameras. Doesn't surprise me. What else have we got there? There will be no a6-700. I'm so goddamn impressed by the footage I've seen from the new Fuji external stock emulation. I think that's, yeah, on the Fuji camera. What else have we got? R3 has better EVF, more megapixels, locking mode dial. It's not much. To be totally honest, like I said, unless you're shooting landscapes, the focus alone would be the reason to get the a7 III over the a7R3. Because I can tell you, the A9 is definitely better in focusing. To have that 93% coverage and the 693, whatever it is, AF points is incredible. Like I said, I've grabbed dancers on continuous focus off the camera, run in and it grabs them instantly, and it takes them coming across the frame. Check out Jason Lanier's video that he's just posted showing the focusing of this camera, where he's got the girl walking across. The focus with eye detect will come right across to the side of the screen, right across. Now, once you've shot that way, it's very hard to go back. It really is. So it's not just the EVF, it's the focusing alone of this a7 III is going to be incredible. What else? A couple more before we finish, because it's getting really, this video is going on for an awful long time. Someone says here, how good is the a7 III for video? I think it's going to be outstanding. Remember, you're dealing with 6K footage, downsample down to your 4K, so I think it's going to be stunning. There's no pixel binning and things like that done, so it's going to be gorgeous, I think, for video, same as what the A9 is. What else? So it appears I can buy 2 a7IIIs or 1 a7III and a lens for less than one Canon 5D Mark III. And say no more, Carl. This is the thing. Why would you? I mean, seriously. This is going to hurt Canon for sure. I definitely think this is going to hurt Canon. With this new gear, we can expect in 10 years. Oh, what year can you expect? God knows. I mean, I can't wait for them to release the A7S, whatever that's going to be. It's going to be, well, incredible when that's released. I'm more of the future-proof, high DPI, crisp ball distance kind of person. I used to work with through digital. Okay, so you're saying that's the reason why you'd like the a7R III. What else? Just looking for some other ones. Now Sigma are offering FE lenses. Yes, I'm going to discuss that in another video. Best budget full-frame camera ever made. It is, definitely. Sabu, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, as said, best full frame. It is. And I think for the money, like I said, you cannot beat this full frame camera for the money that Sony are offering here. I would clearly recommend it, particularly any wedding and portrait photographers. This is probably the best camera that you can get out there. Altric said, selling my A9 and getting 2 a7IIIs. Are you really doing that, Altric? I wouldn't do that. I'd be getting a... I'd keep your A9 and get one a7III with it. A9 is way overpriced. And remember, I've mentioned that before, that Sony needs something that is at that high end. I don't think price comes into that. I think they just want something that's up at the higher end, like the Nikon D4S. What else? Welcome, Sony gang. Richard said a tear just came... down from one of my eyes. Why is that, Richard? You're just so happy or sad? So I'm going to scroll down and read a couple of last ones before we go. Jeffrey said, hi David, hi all. An interesting Sony mirrorless camera discussion again. Love it. Thanks David for all your informative and educational YouTube channel. Thanks so much, mate. I'm so glad you like something. Adam said, I've been in wait mode. I got the 16 to 35 f4. I've got that lens. Love it. 24/7 f4. I've got that lens as well. And I love that as well. I hope the GN lens is dropping cost, but doubtful. I don't think they probably will for a while. What are the different marketable differences between the a7III versus the a7R III? Jonas, just really, it's more just resolution. That's really the only main difference between the two of them. If you need the resolution, you need the a7R III. If you don't need the resolution, I would be going with the a7III. People that have bought the a7R III may not like that, but I think that's the case. Someone said the EVF is slightly better in the a7R III, but overall, I think the a7III is more than enough for most people, including the A9, and I've got an A9, so I'm saying go for the a7III. A7III for indoor stabilized video and a gimbal. I think this would be much better than the a6500, and I agree with you. Low light's going to be better, obviously, and you're working with full frame. So I agree with you. I think it's going to be fantastic. The Sigma stuff I'm going to talk about in another video, maybe tomorrow. What do you think about the price? Can't beat the price. It's ridiculous, to be honest. I think Sony have knocked this out of the ballpark in the price that they're asking. I really thought that this would be more expensive. A7S III is next, and I think that is definitely going to be the next camera, probably NAB, that's going to be coming up shortly. And Do says, will the a7R III be better in video? Probably not. I'm not sure that it will be better in video. The a7 III may be better in video than what that is. We'll have to wait and see. I still think at the moment, to be honest, the cleanest video out the lot of them is still the A9. But they've held their picture profiles back on the Sony A9. I still think the Sony A9 has the cleanest, most beautiful video that Sony have released. And until you've used it, you won't realise how good it actually is. I've used all the Sony cameras, and I still think the Sony A9 is the cleanest and best video that Sony have got. But they've crippled it in the fact that there's no profiles. So if the a7 III has the same video as the A9, it's going to be incredible. What else have we got? I bet you the a7R III and the a7 III are it. These will be still relevant and even the best choice for 4 to 5 years down the road. Peter said, do you know the raw buffer capacity of the a7 III? Yes, I just saw Jason Lanius shoot it, and it was about 70... I think he shot 71 images, and he could still, when he clicked on that buffer, he could still open up the menus and stuff like that as well. So they have improved the buffer, Peter. So you can get 70 odd images. That's why the A9 will still be for sport shooters, because you can shoot 170 odd. Big difference between sport shooters. That may not be enough for sport shooters, but for the average user, you can get 70 odd in the raw buffer. Incredible. It's incredible. Like I said, this camera, they've held nothing back in this camera. They've given you an amazing buffer. They've given you the A9 focusing system. They've given you everything, dual card slots. They've given you USB-C. They've given you everything in this camera. Sony have held nothing back, and it's 2,000 United States dollars, guys. This is why I'm raving about this camera. It's going to be groundbreaking for what it offers, and this is why I'll buy this camera sometime this year. Best wedding camera in the world. This camera will be easily the best wedding camera in the world. What else? Nice. Actually, I'm using the Canon 5D Mark III and thinking of switching to the R3 now, but I'm thinking of the Sony a7III, and I don't blame you. I cannot blame you for thinking about selling the 5D Mark IV. I used that camera recently when I did a test against the A9, and even then, I was so happy to go back to the A9 for the EVF alone, and I certainly would be moving over if I had that camera. Should I wait for the a7S III for video or go for the a7III coming from the a7S? It's a hard decision. If you need 4K 60p, I'd wait. If you don't need 4K 60p, I'd jump on board the a7 III. Thanks, Tony said, thanks for the session, David. No salmon shirt today. If you've watched my last live show, you know what they're talking about there. The lower pixel count, the bigger pixel size, better low light sensitivity. He's talking about the A7S is still king. Jason Lanyard did a video test though, and he said that the a7 III was better than the a7S II for video in noise. So watch that video and draw your own conclusion. Adam said, very exciting. I know it is. It's very exciting. I don't think I've ever been so enthusiastic about a camera. And Sony have basically done that because I'm so excited for the price. And I'm so excited for you guys that you're going to be able to get this camera for this price, guys. So, yeah. What should my first zoom lens be for the a7 III? It depends what you shoot. The 12 to 124, I think is a stunning lens that's just been announced. There's lots of stunning lenses that are out there now. It's hard to say which should be your major lens out there. It will be between the Fuji and the Sony A9. You got me wheeled in, David. I'll be getting the Sony, definitely over the Fuji, but that's just me personally. Peter said, bet on the bread, the a7S III will be likely to have lower noise and really high ISO, but lack oversample 6K to 4K sharpness. We'll have to wait and see what that has. Adam said, agree, best wedding camera ever. I know it is. I think it's definitely the better, best wedding camera ever released for the price. Joel said, thanks, David, you give it the best. All right, guys, well, look, I think I'm going to pop out because that's about all I need to talk about today. Stay tuned for the next video. I'm going to talk about, not today, but probably tomorrow, I'm going to talk about the Sigma release and where I think that fits in as well. If you have any questions, leave those down below because I'd love to see what you guys think about this as well in the questions for the people that can't come on the live show because I always answer everything personally. If you haven't subscribed, pre-subscribed, and I'll see you all again soon, guys, for the next video. So that's all for now. Catch you guys. Well, how exciting to be a Sony user. See you, everyone.